like a minute and a half. And then there's always we are live and I'm talking technical details. Sorry, everybody. But there's always a pause after. So just hang out through the pause at the very end. Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Welcome Facebook, welcome YouTube. It's Thursday. It's good to have you back. We'll get started in just a minute. For folks listening in, as always, this session is being recorded. The live sessions do not have live captions, but YouTube will auto-generate those captions for us once our session is posted. We also encourage you to use Twitter and Facebook to comment and ask questions, and we'll be answering as time allows. We also hope while you're waiting that you use this time to click over to remakelearning.org/join and review the network norms and values, since we don't go through them during our Thursday sessions. And so we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Martinez. I'm the field director for the Remake Learning Network, and welcome to another Thursday edition of Tomorrow, powered by Remake Learning. For those less familiar with our work, Remake Learning is a network that ignites engaging, relevant, and equitable learning practices that support young people who navigate rapid social and technological change. We've been doing this work since 2007, and one thing that almost 15 years of network building has taught us is that we must commit to justice, which helps the learners of greatest need while working alongside them, valuing their experiences, and supporting and honoring their voices, strength, potential, and dignity. We are also attentive to both the most cutting-edge, science-backed, research-driven methods that are undergirded by the timeless practices of educators like Fred Rogers. And this work is nothing without the deep and committed relationships between and among educators, caregivers, and children and families. We know that those relationships unlock the opportunities for everyone to thrive. Tomorrow is a conversation that we're having throughout the network from May through October, asking what we can do today to make tomorrow a more promising place for all learners. We hope you'll continue to join us as we embark on more stories, more conversations, and events happening in October as we celebrate the future of teaching and learning. We hope you'll connect with us, as always, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and if you ever want to learn more about Remake Learning and have a conversation with me, you can email us at info@remakelearning.org, #remake tomorrow. And so it is my absolute pleasure to introduce a very dear friend of mine, the wonderful Sana Jafri. Welcome, Sana.
Thanks for having me. It's such an honor to be a part of Remake Tomorrow's campaign and in conversation with you, Ani Martinez, who I get to call a friend and fellow co-conspirator that is up to hopefully good trouble. So I'm excited to be with you today and with our online community as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this since you agreed to come on and have a conversation with us. You know, I've talked to lots of people from around the country, and ranging from teachers to futurists to researchers and authors, but having the time to be able to chat with you today is one of the first conversations I think we've had with a fellow network builder and network steward. And so I'm really excited about that. And I was hopeful that you could talk a little bit more about where you're coming from, you know, Chicagoland, really talking about the work of the Chicago Learning Exchange.
Yeah, so we don't have any fancy slides, but CLX is similar to Remake Learning Network in that the Chicago Learning Exchange is an exchange or a network that connects youth serving organizations, about 200 youth serving organizations in Chicago, both in school and out of school, who are really united. And I apologize if you hear some wind in the back, I'm outside, but united to advance racial equity in the future of learning and work. And really like grounding that moment in today, we've been doing work around how to leverage both technology and developmental relationships for meaningful, engaging, relevant learning, very similar to Remake Learning Network. So we've had a lot of synergies and kind of similar names actually in our history and at one point. And so who am I? I'm the executive director of the Chicago Learning Exchange. I'm recent and new to that role as January of 2020, but have been with the organization since 2015. And, I guess I would describe myself as a youth and educator champion. I used to be an educator, but I'm more in an ally support role, but also a networks champion, really a big firm believer in the power of networks to connect and support learning and just relationships and growth. Also I love to be that connector, and that's what I feel like networks are really powerful. So I would say that my tagline for Twitter is a serial connector of sorts. And you can find me at Joffs31 and also Chicago Learning Exchange at CLX Change via Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Thanks, Sana. And it's been so cool to watch the work in Chicago evolve alongside the work that's been happening in Pittsburgh for so long. I mean, I remember when we were both stewarding Hive Cities of Learnings as well, right? That's how far back we can trace the work, you and I. And, I also know that you have been a massive champion of Remake Learning Days across America, right? One of the first cities outside of Pittsburgh to really pick up that mantle. Can you just briefly talk a little bit about what that has been like in Chicago?
Yeah, so it was kind of just serendipitous because within our community, we actually often met at the library, the Harold Washington Library, which is kind of a central location in Chicago. It's also a beautiful, physical monument. If you're into architecture, there's beautiful argyles or gargoyles on the top. But the funny thing is we met in the basement of the library, which was kind of synonymous to our work is we're doing this amazing work, connecting organizations, connecting educators and organizations so that they can better serve and build the social capital of their youth and really decrease the opportunity gap. But we were under the hood, we were literally in the basement. And we really needed to showcase how all these places of learning they're really, Chicago is a city of abundance and really showcasing how learning happens anytime and anywhere. And then serendipitously, I think Anna, you or Sunana reached out and said, hey, we're doing Remake Learning Days across America. Would you guys want to partner with us? And we said, yes, Mama, we definitely would. Sorry, there's my little one. I took a nap, Mama. Okay, thank you. Wasn't expecting that, but I guess I should have.
As a clarifying note for all of our viewers and listeners, one of our network norms and values virtually has become expect children, expect nibblings, expect pesky brothers and sisters, dogs, cats, wind, and other. So very welcome. And I love that human. So
yeah.
Sorry, please continue.
Yeah, so we were invited in 2019 to kind of model and create, build off of the model that you all created in Pittsburgh and kind of make it Chicago. So we created the Citywide Festival in Chicago in 2019, but also had as our goals of racial equity, really had a neighborhood focus. Unfortunately, Chicago is, really a tale of two cities or three cities within the city. It's really drastic as you go from one part of the city to the next part of the city. So how do we lift up the amazingness within some of those neighborhoods that have been really devastated in some ways? So we partnered with Project Exploration, which is a STEM and STEAM organization in Chicago based in Austin, really focused on changing the face of science. But they also play kind of a network role within the Austin community. So we partnered with them to create an Austin hub for Remake Learning Days Shy. And are joining you all, again, excited to join you all for 2020/2021 and a longer arc in the campaign. So thank you for to you, Sunana, Dory, Yuling, and sharing your wonderful model with us and inviting us to make it our own as well.
Well, thank you and Chicago and Project Exploration for really being a flagship of what that celebration is really intended to do, which is help caregivers, families, communities connect to the resources that are right in their backyard and the hidden gems of all of our cities where we know teaching and learning are happening, but they're not always elevated to the level that they might deserve, right?
Yeah.
Both in school and out of school. And so that's an interesting thing to start to think about when we think about the value of teaching and learning anywhere, anytime, particularly in this moment, right? And, you know, we've been talking a lot about 2020, the twin pandemics in this moment, or an educator in this moment.
Yeah, I think it's both teacher. I think it's all the roles: teacher, mentor, administrator, all the people that are caring for young people. You know, whether you're a janitor or whether you're, you know, whatever role it is, how do we also care for the people that care? Has been really on top of my mind, and why I think, like, what's today's focus of the conversation around Remake Tomorrow? How do we leverage this moment that we're in, where everyone is realizing, well, not everyone, but maybe a lot of people are realizing the importance of educators, mentors, you know, the people that care for our young, you know, our children, and the important role that they play, as they have had to kind of pivot and become that role internally, maybe in their house, and just realizing, wow, like, you know, like teachers are, and mentors and educators do such important work, but aren't necessarily valued in the way that they should be, whether that's through compensation, you know, through recognition, like, you know, how do they get celebrated? So I feel like COVID-19, you know, has really illuminated a lot of the injustices that we're seeing, but it's also like Arundhati Roy talks about, it's also like the pandemic is a portal for us to kind of imagine a different future. So how can we imagine a different tomorrow? Like, how do we leverage this moment where folks are realizing that educators, mentors, administrators are essential workers, that play like important roles as learning brokers, as knowledge keepers, as well-being keepers, right? Like, there's so much going on right now, and young people are experiencing so much, and then the cells are like, how do we also support them? That's a lot of the work that CLX does. Like today, this morning, we've been trying to incorporate wellness practices consistently in every one of our meetings and meetups, so that, like, not assuming that everyone is well in every moment, and that, like, you know, we could do our little part, and those little parts can add up to something bigger, to, you know, really think about how essential workers, mentors, educators are also well, so that they can be well for young people. But we know that, like, in every field, if you're not well yourself, you can't serve, right?
It's the same with social change, right? If you're not starting with yourself and a critical lens with yourself, you're never going to change anything. So would you mind giving me an example of what one of those wellness practices looks like?
Yeah, and this is really a credit to a network member, so I gotta call out, you know, our fam, and that's Saida Taylor, who is actually just recently started a new nonprofit called Organic Wellness. You can follow her YouTube page, so it's all free resources. Again, if you're looking for something to use with your youth or internally. So we've been doing stretching exercises, breathing exercises. We've been doing water. So, for example, today I have my glass because I was reminded that I'm not drinking enough water, and, like, our bodies are made up of water. And so how do we make sure that we're being hydrated, so that we can, you know, be well? And then, you know, Ani, one of the things we could do right now is just, like, where do you feel tension in your body? So, like, we could put our hands on our neck or wherever it is that you feel tension. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then release for 4. So just simple mechanisms. You could do this virtually. It's very transferable. So, like, how do you kind of build those practices within educator spaces, so that we are intentionally building spaces where, again, educators are well, and, you know, sharing those best practices. But SIDA has been really our fortress of wellness, and helping us kind of make sure that we are taking care of ourselves as we continue to think about taking care of
That is a very heard and physically felt reminder, Sana, one that I intend to start to integrate into our practices.
Yeah, and that's what it is. It's just like an exchange of best practices. That's why we kind of actually shifted our name. But I think like going back to the point, like it's just like we have to be well. And sometimes we're not well, and also just acknowledging that, right? Like providing space for folks to talk about like how they're like there's so much going on in the world like every day. It's hard to kind of just keep up. But
just well, it's really hard to stay well.
Yeah. So I think it's also just about like in Chicago, we talk a lot about trauma-informed care, which is important, right? Like there's a lot of there's like a violence epidemic in our city, but like we also have to move the conversation from not just trauma to like healing and joy and resistance and like talking about that. And so I think like and like also letting kids be kids, like letting them be goofy and happy and just like it doesn't always have to go to that conversation or that end. So kind of like retraining our things ourselves to think about like restorative practices and healing as part of that wellness journey.
Yeah, that treading the line of supporting youth activism, supporting youth agency, and also supporting youth joy is something that we talk a lot about in our youth voice working group, especially, right? That you see this pressing demand on young people because it's often one of the things we attune ourselves to hear, and we're very good at attuning ourselves to hear things that we want to hear, right? But I think it's one of the many reasons why not only youth voice, not only social emotional wellness, mental wellness, but also the arts are so critical, right? And that's something that Chicago has been so good at for so long. I just know so many amazing arts and media programs that are part of the Chicago Learning Exchange.
Yeah, arts and media. And I think like one of the things that's beautiful and universal about arts is that it could be incorporated in STEM, right? Like or STEAM, that's the A. And so I think about thinking, and you should really talk about this because you're the actual artist. I'm just like a faker, but like how do you use art as a tool of healing, but also as a tool of creation? And, especially right now, like it's something that is like not in front of a screen potentially that could be really powerful, as what we're hearing from community members and educators and youth is that like everyone's a little burnt out by the screen engagement. So like how do we think about art as that and in that conversation? So Anna, do you want to, kudos to you all in Pittsburgh too. Like I know that the Pittsburgh museum system is really strong, and then the neighborhood community-based organizations too. Where do you see kind of creative learning kind of meeting this moment?
It's interesting that you should say that. It's been coming up a lot this week. Speaking of attuning yourself to things, the Arts Education Collaborative, the Allegheny Partners for Out of School Time, or APOST, as many of our locals know them, the Legacy Arts Project, they have all banded together through a Heinz-funded initiative called the Creative Learning ecosystem, right? And that's building off of many years of work and relationships and really starting to look at what that network support around creative learning looks like. And the Arts Education Collaborative, especially for the creative arts in this moment, have been facilitating a series called the Rekindle Workshops. And that was seeded by a very mini grant that Remake Learning was able to provide for them. And the intention of what those Rekindle Workshops, I think, was conceptualized as one thing. And then once we were put in the context of physical distancing, they really recentered that around supporting the spiritual, emotional energy of arts educators in the region, and just using arts as the context to then build community in this really beautiful way. So that's one way that I've seen it. Another is just very much, as you said, the deep need for humans to create always, but especially in a moment of such collective grief. So we've seen just wave upon wave of organizations banding together initiatives like Art for All, which are getting free art kits to caregivers and families, and just, delivering art supplies to households. I know that there's a huge arts supply drive at Pittsburgh Public Schools on September 8th and 9th. Check it out. You can support, you can donate supplies. So it's been a range. I also see that, you're getting snaps in the comments around cultivating well-being in digital communities. And that's very much to the point that we're talking about, right? Like, how do you build community physically distanced? How do you build community in a time of massive collective grief? And how do you build community among educators at any point in time across context, right? How have you been seeing that in Chicago?
So we created, a lot of our work is actually in response to community and needs. So our community needs are educators and mentors that work with young people. So like we created the CLX virtual check-ins because Dave Build, who's at the Nature Museum, said like, hey, I need a space to like connect and learn and share together, and also process and just like, and we're like, yes, Dave, you're right. We should do this and we should build a space. So like, let's do it. So we did it, especially, so it was like right when COVID hit. So March, I also, just disclaimer, had a baby March 21st. So like I was kind of out. So really kudos to the team for managing that transition and taking up the baton to, so Gina, Kier, Maria, Savannah, and everyone behind the scenes to really make that happen. And, it was, again, just like a collective sandbox so that educators can feel supported in their professional learning network in their communities, as everyone is kind of like a year one teacher again, or mentor, and kind of learning these new things. Like, how do you facilitate online? There's like, it's very different than you're facilitating in person, right? There's like all this wizardry that you have to do in the background. So like, how do you set yourself up for success? How do you share? And how do you also just be okay with like, so for example, some folks today said like, oh, I tried that and it really failed. But like you tried, right? Like, I think that's the point right now, that we're trying to just reinforce, is that like, I think like things might not be the same or perfect, or perfect needs to look different. And there's also some real opportunities. So some folks were like really celebrating and providing space for celebration. Like, hey, I was able to reach teens or youth or middle schoolers like out of state. Like, I don't even know how they found our program, but they found our program and they're like engaging. So like, there's also this moment of opportunity to think outside the box. And like, what we're trying to do is create a sandbox for them, for folks to do that.
Totally. Yeah. So someone a couple weeks ago at the State of Black Learning conference in Pittsburgh, which was virtual, it was 3 weeks long, 4 weeks long this year. It was fantastic. And one of the speakers said, well, healthcare workers, nurses, they had this moment a couple years ago, right? Like, you saw nurses really come into the public consciousness and really appreciate and understand nurses. And nurses out there might disagree with me. I'm sure you're out there feeling all kinds of unappreciated. But the point was, maybe teachers are having a similar moment right now where the public, are having this awakening of everything that education and teaching and learning touches.
Yeah, no, I think it is this moment. And I think what we need to do is, how do we kind of come together to really leverage the moment so that it's not just a missed opportunity, that we actually see tomorrow as a changed state. And so that could look like, like different compensation structures. It looks like how do educators, both in school and out of school. So I would say like teachers, but also mentors, like how are they recognized, right? Like as experts in learning, how are they supported? How are educators, in school educators, also connected? Like, there's really, like in the call that I was in this morning, it's really the village. Like right now we got to be thinking about the village, not just the classroom,
Right.
and thinking about how like the village. And then actually what's unique about this moment is also the virtual village, like online. Like, how do we really leverage this time and today to think about how we shift the conversation to anytime, anywhere learning. Like, I think
Mhm.
that like, it's kind of funny because you and I have been doing this work for like a really long time, and everyone was like, oh, it's super niche. It's super like for people that are already wealthy, right? But like, it's
Yeah.
really an equity conversation that we're having. And now everyone gets it. And so that's good. But
Mhm.
how do we kind of leverage this moment to continue to push the conversation? Because I know that in Chicago, there's still like, I feel like we're not going far enough to like have that conversation. Everyone's kind of defaulting to school as the only mechanism of learning, but really there are all these places of learning, whether it's the Center for Excellence in Computer Science Education, there's We All Code, there's Project Exploration, there's all these organizations doing amazing work. And how do we connect young people to their passions and interests in this moment, right? Like, they have time, they have opportunities. Maybe they're really passionate about cooking. Maybe they're really passionate about learning to code. Maybe they're really passionate about or interested in being a veterinarian. So asking young people what they want to be and how do we leverage this moment to kind of connect them? And also going back to the point of like supporting essential workers is like, I got many emails in March that really made me sad, where folks were like, I'm losing my job. What can you do for me, Sana?
Mhm.
And or they weren't potentially, this was before the stimulus package came in, they were contract workers working for an OST organization, so they didn't qualify for the same benefits as an in-school educator might, and they didn't have any like light. There was no like, hey, I might get a stimulus package. Obviously things changed, but like, that's a real structural issue that we need to address in this moment, so that we're, if we are faced with another pandemic or anything, like, how can we imagine a different tomorrow today and really leverage that moment to change it? We have to invest in
Mhm.
education,
Mhm.
both in school, online, and build the infrastructure. Like, I don't know why we don't have universal broadband, right? Like, it's something that we could definitely really easily do, or decentralize in a way so it's not universal even.
Yeah, you just said so many things that I'm excited to
Sorry.
no, that
Yeah.
I'm excited to respond to, because you're absolutely right. We have been having this conversation since the beginning of doing our work, certainly, and that precedes us for decades. And the first thing I'll sort of respond to them in backwards, right? The internet. How long have we been saying the internet needs to be a utility, right? And how long have we been fighting that fight? And we know, I think that there are pathways into fighting that fight, and I think it's gotten some really important policy players to understand just how deep and important treating the internet as a utility is, and not that it hasn't been until this moment. I think that's really promising. And then other things that I wanted to respond to there are also around these deep equity issues that we have all heard. These are not new issues, and we know that. But what's interesting to me is that we still continue forward at such a pace, right? That we are consistently creating new inequities in our approach to supporting teaching and learning in this moment. And I wonder how we might slow down a bit as we start to design things like learning pods, which are a great example, or access to tutoring and the great demand of tutoring in this moment, and who can afford tutors, how do you access tutors, what makes a quality tutor, how do you train tutor, what might the role of cognitive tutors and cognitive technologies be in this moment. And so I just said many things, so let me reel it back a little bit. Like learning pods, asking those who are often the least supported, our out of school time community, to really shoulder the physical care of children.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on a bunch of really good points around teaching and learning, and I think like we have to be really careful, as you mentioned, in this moment, to not create greater inequities. But it feels like perhaps we are in some ways already through perhaps the learning pod model. I don't know. I don't think anyone's intentionally doing it, right? Like no one's like intentionally trying to sabotage other kids. or other, but I think it's just like that kind of age-old question is, how do you think to support your kids, but also others, like the village of kids that are in the city, or within, other places. And so I think that your question around just like how do we think about inequities that are being created in this moment is, I don't have an answer for, but I think it's a question that we have to continue to kind of center, because we have to be really careful, right? Like in international development, one of the core principles is do no harm. Like we can do some harm right now, even in this moment. And so how do we make sure we're not doing harm, is something that I think is really important. But I think that, going back to your issues of like, we have to center equity, justice, these principles and values as we continue to dream, and as we continue to dream and implement what tomorrow looks like, or what today looks like.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that I know that I have always valued around being your colleague and being your thought partner and being your friend. And I know Sunana would feels the same way, is that so often people see innovation and equity as these parallel tracks that they can't intersect. Whereas from our position, we say it can't be truly innovative unless it's equitable, right? Like it's just not an innovative approach at that point.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And just like, but I think a lot of people don't think of, especially the kind of common players in the innovation world that we know are kind of like, if you think of racial lines, just like white men, that are kind of the innovators of today, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg or whoever it is, Elon Musk, like those are the people that we consider innovators. But, what would be exciting is just thinking about how we lift up other innovators. I know that there are a lot in Chicago that have been working as, equity champions that are both addressing equity and innovation together. And it would be cool to continue to lift them up as like essential. So for example, Dr. Nicole Pinkert is, I think, a leader in a lot of this work, and has been like, predates me for sure, predates a lot of this work, but really a pioneer in digital learning, but thinking about centering equity in that conversation, because we can do harm. And I think that we have to also just center the folks that we're trying to, not just center, but maybe pass the mic to the voices of those that are, that we're trying to support. And I think design thinking is like a really good methodology or approach to help you do that if you're looking for one. And I saw that Jeff Ritter in our comments included like Worldly XP, which is a resource I think that you could check out. Worldly and then xp.com. It's for gap year students that are recent grads, or others that are thinking about how they could connect to opportunities and experiences. So just a quick plug. And if you guys have other comments or questions, Ani and I are looking at them. So thank you for participating. Thank you for listening and joining us on this, well, at least in Chicago, beautiful Thursday.
Less beautiful, but beautiful because I'm talking to you. And please do share your resources too, right? That's part of the network effect. It's an opportunity to be really, for lack of a better word, selfish, to really put the work out there, because no one of us can do this work alone. And I think networks are a great place to be. More is more. Would you agree with that, Sana?
Yeah, I think it kind of helps us. Like, I think what's unique about both you and I together in our work is that like both of our places, Pittsburgh and Chicago, are very different cities, but we have been doing kind of similar work, and fostering and connecting and supporting network building. So my question to you, Ani, is like, what does network stewardship look like? What does that mean to you? And what does that future look like?
Yeah, for me, the way that I've seen and developed my role as a network steward over the last 7 years has been always using the analogy of the switchboard operator. And I know that other members of the Remake Learning facilitation team see themselves more as builders, more as connectors. You often hear the metaphor of weaver rolled in. I mean, definitively communicator, right? And then I also think that there is a lot around network stewardship that is around creating hybrids around connecting in really strange and creative ways of fostering crossover. I know that we both love and were, young professionals at one time in the world of Hamago and the world of remixing and like using the language of remixing. And I think networks are a really good place to do that deep cultivating work. It's a lot like gardening, right? The ecosystem would exist with or without the network. The network is able to act like a trellis in a garden and really help those plants like reach the sky in a much better way.
I love that metaphor, and I used to be an English teacher, so I appreciate you you using that. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna probably steal that. Just the disclaimer. Like it is a garden, and definitely the value, and I think the beauty in all of our work is that we get to. Like there is such a vibrant ecosystem in Chicago. What we do is get to connect those dots amongst those, and I think the power of connection should not be underestimated. Like it's crucial to every element of our lives, especially like relationships, and learning is central to, like, relationships are really central to learning. So if you think about like how your educators are, how you connect with your parents or your families, so how many relationships are kind of their elements of social capital, who has social capital, again, getting back to that question of equity, that has really not been a focus of learning. It's been always like content driven, both in school and sometimes out of school too, right? Like we don't think about like how important relationships are to learning. So in this moment, I think it would be really powerful for us to kind of value relationships as both an input and an output for learning. And I feel like network stewards are critical to that. So I love that you said that, the kind of connection or the role that you play is that switchboard. But you can only play that switchboard role, Ani, if you have the relationships, right? Like if you do the work to know what needs to be connected to this thing. So I think that like weaver, builder, connector is all of those things. And I think it's a little wonky, so a lot of people just don't get it. So I love just talking to you because you get it. There aren't a lot of positions like the network weaver, curator, manager that I've seen, but I know that ecosystems and kind of collective impact, all these different terminologies, whatever you want to use, are becoming kind of more common, but there's still a long way to go. And I feel like Pittsburgh and Chicago are probably thankfully pretty more advanced than other cities in some way. So I feel like we often get called upon to share what we've learned, and we love to do that. We have a resource page that we've done to kind of share some of the lessons learned. And I know you guys have done a lot of work around documentation and publication of this work.
Yeah. I like to say that you and I have one of those jobs of the future that don't exist yet, but will be very common in the next 20, 25 years. Right? That's something that I hope to be true.
Yeah, for sure. And the person that I'm just going to put it out in the world because I feel like it's like you got to put things out in the world sometimes. Like, so Malcolm Gladwell, I'm a fangirl of his. And he writes about the important role of connectors. And there's different roles he talks about in his book. I think it's Tipping Point, but it's kind of the social thread that he. So connectors are powerful people that connect us to opportunities that we might not have. And so I think if we're thinking about centering equity, it's just such an important role. And I feel like educators are such powerful connectors. Whether that's connecting them to basic human needs, food resources, or connecting them to learning opportunities. Mentors are that, as well. And so I think really thinking about connection as it's really essential to change. And I feel like I wish more people would understand that, or kind of use that strategy as part of their social change models.
Totally. You had mentioned design thinking. The power of being a connector, the power of being a broker too, is something that teachers just inherently are. Teachers are designers, educators are connectors. And so it's very much a blessing and a privilege to have being a connector as the centerpiece of our role, because I know that that's a rare thing, that not everyone has that, but it's inherent to millions of people, and we know that often some of the rock stars in the world are some of the best connectors too. I'm thinking of a previous guest, Kwaku Ning, shout out. That's just one of the things that we bonded over really early on, was that brokering. And you said a couple things that really pinged and resonated with me. This idea around responsibility was a big one, right? That being a connector means that you have to raise that social capital. And so you have to be very intentional about how you raise that social capital. Whose relationships do you center? Who are the folks that if you had to write them down on a piece of paper without the assistance of any of our technology, whose name would you know? And would you know their email, or would you know their phone number? Probably not, but you'd at least know who you could get on the phone, right? And then I'm also thinking about this idea of social capital, right? We talk about social capital a lot in the Remake Learning context, raising social capital. And the team had a pretty courageous conversation not too long ago about that term, and how often that term is not used in a positive light, that people hoard social capital. And one thing that I like to dream about is, what does the work look like when it's social capital for good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on social capital, but I've done a little bit of, research in this. And so I think there's a professor named Yoso that talks about community wealth of social capital. So I think that sometimes social capital is seen as kind of like the capitalistic view of capital, right? Like it's only the people that are wealthy that have capital, and like kind of reframing that. And I think that's essential to like learning, so that like we think about every young person has amazingness in them. Every young person, every person really, whether they're young or old, has something of value to offer, and what we're doing is just creating that exchange. So I think it's just like, from what my reading, thinking about like, social capital for good, but also reframing social capital as like a term that needs to be kind of reckoned with, to think about how it can be not just recreate inequities that we see in the kind of capitalistic sense, but thinking of it from like a cultural wealth perspective, that everyone brings wealth, but in different ways. And that's the possibility of just connecting that and bringing that out, right? Like that's the work.
Yeah, and I would hope that that is a goal that networks can set forth moving forward. I know it's definitely something that community organizations do all the time. Like, I'm thinking immediately of Local Heroes Boom Concepts. And I mean, that's one of the incredible things that they bring to the fore and that they really lead in, is helping their neighborhood and helping the artists that are part of their community.
Yeah, no, I think, similarly, I would say like there's a wide range of organizations in our 200 person network or group network. So one person, there's an organization that, she hasn't been as active, but Jackie Moore with robotic, she runs Chicago Nights, which is a robotics program, but she's really like a one person nonprofit, but she's really connected to her community. Feel like, again, brings a lot of that social capital and connection to her community and change, and is really advocate for Black-led robotics teams in Chicago, and really thinking about how that can help change the trajectory of computer science possibilities. So I think, it's a hard balance for CLX, because we have and I'm sure for Remake Learning Network too, because we have such a breadth of organizations and also size of organizations that range from one person to like the city agencies, which are very large. Like the Chicago Public Library has 81 branches. So just like that's real. But I feel like that's like the beauty of the network, is then also thinking about how they might partner and collaborate and come together and learn from one another, whether Jackie's, leading a session or Julie Kozlowski is reading a session at TPL.
And that's the beauty too of, as we become more technologically savvy, as we create our increased, what KnowledgeWorks calls partnership with code, just in our day-to-day life, that's a promising innovation that I think being really smart about how we use data to be partners of relationship management beyond CRMs, right? Like CRMs are one thing, but I'm talking about like even beyond the use of a CRM. Like how do we use that to really be mindful of where our attention is, who is getting that microphone? Can we create some data around that and create evidence around that?
Yeah, I know that's something that you guys have been really intentional about. Do you want to add anything around that? I think that that's something that is an aspiration for us. I don't think we're there yet, but
I don't think we're there yet either. But it is something that I doggedly pursue, and I truly do believe in. So if there's a tech company out there that wants to crack that nut in partnership and in research with us, please let us know.
Yeah, we've looked at the tool Kumu, which is a social network analysis kind of tool, but also implementing kind of like Tableau dashboards and other things that are helping us to tell the story, because I feel like the thing that there is so much richness and exchange and connections, but it's really hard to track, right? Like it's not like a traditional direct service model where you can track like, oh, this person came into the session. And then, like obviously we have attendance data, but, but it's a different, you're not capturing the fullness of the impact when you only just look at those kind of surface level, because it really is deeper.
I was able to get my job we were able to partner because of, right? And how do we not only understand what the enabling conditions are of the network effect? Like we have some ideas, we have some hunches, we write a bunch of them down in our playbook. We've updated a lot of them in our practices since then, but to quantitatively measure them is something that deeply fascinates me. And I think that we're very close.
That's exciting. Please share, and hopefully a future one.
I will. Then I think I know some methodologies that might be helpful, but not yet. And our hour is flying, and so I want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about our core question, the question that we talk about every single Thursday, is really looking at that far horizon. And we use the language of preferred futures, which comes from futurism. And when Jason is on the call, he's very useful to explain the concept of possible futures. But knowing that there are many futures that are possible, particularly stemming from this particular moment, what is your preferred future, Sana?
That's a great question. And I love the preferred future and futurism. I think for me, it's just because our work is working with educators and organizations that serve young people, like thinking about the importance and just like, again, that essential workers, like I feel like that terminology is actually really good in some way, because it's like, yes, this is essential. Like these workers are essential and they are super important. So how do we change the realities of essential workers, right? Like how do we better, again, compensate? How do we better support? How do we better connect? How do we actually create a pipeline so that more people of color can have these jobs, right? Like, so there are disparities we see. And so I think in my preferred future, it would be that educators are mentors, are really essential workers. So, and I would hone in on mentors and OST educators, because I feel like the in-school space, and I was an in-school teacher, actually has some structure around, existing infrastructure. So there's a union, there's a Chicago Teachers Union is a badass group. They are, I don't know if I can say that, but they are strong, right? But there isn't necessarily that same infrastructure for OST educators. And I feel like they're often forgotten and even not, maybe even defined as educators. But there is so much expertise, so much learning that they are helping to foster. What if we imagine the village of those essential workers, and thought about how they're supported to, compensated, recognized, and continuing to kind of think about and for young people, like how do they, like we always ask young people what do they want to be? Do they want to, how could they be future mentors and educators themselves? But we have to create the infrastructure. for that to happen. And I know that recently in Chicago, there was actually this pilot done with really thinking about how do you support community-driven educator supports and mentor supports. So it's called STEAM ambassadors. So if you're going to serve the community, how can you foster and come from the community too that you're serving? So like, how do you actually get community members that are in Austin? And this is work that's led by Northwestern's Office of Community Education Partnerships, OSEP, Dr. Nicole Pinker, Truman College, which is a city college that's focused on education. So again, building that pipeline to that vertical, like certificate or whatever it is, and Project Exploration and some other organizations. But again, really trying to build that model so that there is a model so that today's realities aren't tomorrow. So we can really remake tomorrow. And have educators be essential workers. So I guess my tagline or kind of succinct would be, my preferred future would be where educators and mentors are essential workers, today and in the future tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that. And knowing Nicole's work and having had the gift of getting to speak with her on multiple occasions too, I know how much goes into thinking about not only place and space, but also movement between, right? And that's another thing that I'm hearing you say is that essential work, but also the breadth of movement between, particularly for out of school time providers, knowing that I might be an out of school time provider and I get my start in this tiny art studio, and then maybe I like get another gig and I fill in my time, and then maybe like I'm working at a restaurant. But the importance of being able to move throughout a space is so important, and it becomes increasingly important for our kids too, particularly in these hybrid models. Maybe I'm in my school for a couple hours a day, maybe I move out. Again, thinking about possible futures. My preferred possible future is one that really values and centers movement, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's also, I think institutionalizing it. So like, for example, I think the city of Chicago did some work around creating the Chicago Service Corps. So if you think about, there's like Teach for America, there's all these programs and things like that. So how do we kind of, again, institutionalize this essential workers and support educators as experts in learning? And then also not just a job, it's like a career that can actually be, you can move up, et cetera, and you can sustain a family or whatever it is that you're interested in. So I feel like that is like, we have to shift our budget conversations as a city, as an organization, as a country, to say like how we're going to actually invest in education. I see Greg is on the comment. So thank you, Greg, and the Grable Foundation for funding that work in Pittsburgh and across the country. But we just need more. And I think that we can do it. We just have to make it a priority, because budgets are really moral documents that just demonstrate what our values are.
Budgets are moral documents. I had to say it again and affirm it. Yes.
Yes.
That is a beautiful thing to say.
Yeah. And that's how we make our preferred future, right? Like, we gotta not just talk about it, we gotta make it happen, and we gotta fund it to make it happen, because all the other folks are. And so I think we have to, like, if we're going to actually be real about making our preferred futures a reality, we have to create the structures to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And grab things by their roots too, which is, I think, a big part of the work that we're feeling right now. That's the felt part of this work right now.
Yeah. Ani, do you want to share more about your preferred future? Because I know you're like an expert futurist.
No one's ever called me that before.
I think of you as a futurist for sure. I feel like I learn a lot about just like actual technologies and how technologies can be used for good, and how we can kind of think about that part. But also just like, I feel like you're unique in that you can bring the technology, but also just really center it in people. And I feel like that's sometimes the shortcoming of technology, is like we just think of it as like the thing, but really it's the people is the thing.
Thank you for saying that. That's very humbling. I have such a clear picture of my preferred future. I've been dreaming of it for 10 years. And, it's very much about a future, like a sci-fi future. And the AI are here, and we're kicking it with sentient creatures from other planets and technologies of our own making. But the very first thing I think of in my preferred future is dirt. I think about dirt under fingernails. I think about cultivating land. I think about an earth that isn't burning and isn't in the midst of climate crisis. So that's number one, my preferred future, on a planet that is shared with other intelligent creatures, that has liberated practices of where children can physically be and how we can keep them safe, no matter who you are, where you're from, so that you're accounted for, that what you care about counts, that what your culture and knowledge and your lineage means, and the values that you bring with you count as valuable, trusted, sacred knowledge, that we've made a lot of reparations for a lot of the harm, even within our education spaces, that we've really accounted for that and have thought really deeply about that, knowing that that was never an easy road to come to, and that zip codes are no longer determinant of what you have access to, and the brilliance, that the mirror of your environment is a mirror of your brilliance, and that holds true, and that meritocracy is no longer a myth, right? These are all things that I believe in really deeply, that people are moving through space in intergenerational ways too, that we value our elders and we value our babies and we value our middle school kids who are so often just like pushed out of the picture, right? And out of school time and in school are maybe not words that we use anymore, because they no longer hold meaning. But brick and mortar spaces are still palaces and temples and shrines and huts and villages of where we investigate our own development. And maybe our economies could be tied to the way we learn. Who knows? But that's my preferred future.
Wow, I want to live in your preferred future. So that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And I love the dirt. And just, there was so much in there, so I can't probably do it justice. So I'm not going to try. But this is why, I think it's so important that, you're doing this work, and that we can kind of continue to learn and be together to imagine our preferred future. Because if we're not imagining, we won't get there. So thank you to providing this space and creating the space that we can imagine, dream, and build a different tomorrow.
And thank you for reminding me, my friend, how important dreaming and imagination is. It's a healing tool I have not been using enough for my own personal self. So we talk about healing practices, full circle. What I was just able to share was a definitive healing practice for me. It's been a really long time since I've done it. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think that's a really beautiful place to end for this Thursday.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Sana, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ani, and thanks to the team too for all of your work that you guys do, and for the amazing network that you guys have. We're really grateful to be on this journey with you all. And once we can be face to face again, we would love to have like a Pittsburgh, Chicago connection and reunion. I know we often did it at the Connected Learning Lab and others, but there's so much. Every time I talk to you, I learn something. Like, we got to do the State of Black Learning in Chicago. So I don't know, like if that's something that we could do. I don't know. Like there's always so much richness. Yeah, I don't know. There's just always so much richness. And I feel like what the privilege that you and I both have is that we get to work with so many amazing educators and mentors that are dedicated to youth prior to COVID, have dedicated their lives and really need to be honored and recognized. And so how do we kind of continue to push the conversation to think of them as essential workers, as that should be supported? So I think that we'll continue this journey. It's not going to be like a COVID moment, but we have to leverage the moment to really imagine and create a different tomorrow.
I'm honored to do it alongside you, my friend. Thank you to our audience, as always. Thank you for your engagement, for your gratitude, for your time and attention. That is a precious gift. And I hope that you will join us the rest of September, we're going to be talking all about the future of innovative policy and how we center young people in our policy and practices. We're also going to be hearing more directly from teens and having a conversation between teens and mentors and Afrofuturism. That's going to be a fun one. And then we'll be hearing from our fabulous friends from Finland, which is a really fun thing to say. 100 joins us at the end of the month. And so, Sana, thank you for kicking off September and holding such a rich, wonderful conversation today. And I'm going to sign us off. Thank you, everyone.
Likewise. Bye.